Have you ever thought, is this just me when struggling to stay organized, start tasks, or manage time? For those of us over 50, these challenges might not be just aging. They could be ADHD hiding in plain sight for decades. I'm Jami Shapiro, host of Grandma Has ADHD, and I'm building a community where your experiences matter. Whether you're diagnosed, questioning, or simply curious, you're not alone. Our Facebook group is filled with vibrant, understanding people over 50 who share their stories, strategies, and yes, even their struggles with plenty of laughter along the way. Ready to find your people? Join our growing Grandma Has ADHD Facebook community. Please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen and share it with someone who might need to hear they're not alone, because ADHD doesn't have an age limit and neither does understanding yourself better. Together, we're changing the conversation about ADHD after 50. Come be part of the story. Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Grandma Has ADHD. We are joined today by my guest, Brett Frankenberg, and he is the founder of Apex Health Advocates, who brings over 30 years of healthcare experience as a provider, executive, and passionate advocate. Brett's mission became clear through 3 life-changing moments: fighting an 18-month battle to overturn a $37,000 insurance denial when his son needed specialized surgery after a snowboarding injury, rescuing his father from unnecessary long-term care after medication errors left him cognitively impaired following routine back surgery, and guiding a close friend's family through every step of recovery after an out-of-state accident. These experiences taught Brett what many of us learned the hard way: even the best healthcare systems can fall short, and families often feel overwhelmed and unsure how to protect their loved ones. That is why he founded Apex Health Advocates, to bring professional, compassionate guidance to families navigating complex care decisions. Because as Brett says, no one should have to go through it alone. We're going to keep it because that's how we roll when we have ADHD. And he says, yeah, go through it alone. I got it. And I have to say, I set my phone to do not disturb, but then my computer didn't cooperate. And so it caught me right in the middle. But I also want to share, if I can, Brett, one of the reasons that I wanted, for many reasons. First of all, Brett has not been diagnosed with ADHD, so I'm going to put that disclaimer out there, but I believe your child and father have it.
That's correct.
Based on your bio, and I'll tell you why. And your failure to follow through with my request for information. When you interview people with ADHD, it is like herding cats. So it's the norm. So he felt horrible. I'm like, oh, please, I'm so used to it. So just here's a tip. This is what I did. I went to his website, which is Apex. What is it, Brett?
ApexHealthAdvocates.com.
ApexHealthAdvocates.com. So I went to his About Us site. I stuck it into Claude and I said, friend Claude, can you help me come up with a bio for my guest, Brett? And first you were her, but then I said, no, Claude, Brett's a man. And he just flipped it out for me. And here we are. So another distraction, my family just walked in the middle of a podcast. I'm not supposed to be here. So if you guys hear background noise, I apologize in advance. But so welcome. That was a very long-winded introduction, but I also want to give you 2 other shout outs. People with ADHD tend to have a very strong sense of social justice. They believe in doing what is fair and right. And the fact that you are doing advocacy work is just a perfect example. We have pretty long bios. We like to take on a lot. So welcome. Hi.
Hi. 2 boxes checked right there for sure. My bio are always long-winded, and you're right about the social justice aspect, but thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And you did a really good job of doing my job for me, which is talking about me. But I do want to give my friend Jami a shout out, because she and I had a discussion a couple weeks ago, and she said, crisis never makes an appointment. And I've been using that quite a bit. So if you want to add that to my long-winded bio, we can back it up and start all over.
Well, let's go back though, because I do want you to explain a little bit about what it is you do.
Yes.
And then I want to get into why I wanted to have you on and why you believe you might have ADHD. Because remember, I am not a doctor and I do not diagnose ADHD. I just see it strongly.
Understood. Yeah, so you're right. So I had been a licensed clinician, a physical therapist for 32 years. Spent the last 16 years as a healthcare executive. And, the stories that you told at the beginning are all true and, very personal, friends, family, but really been doing this type of work as an executive for years. So my last couple positions were in the home health space. I was a VP of operations for one organization and the CEO.
So, I keep things very real because, as I like to share with the audience, when I am very real and perfect is definitely the enemy of done, then it gives space for our guests to realize that they don't have to walk through life perfectly either. And so, to be honest with you, and I'm sure you can relate, I got so distracted with the noise, and I'm like, then my brain starts to spin. Can everybody hear it? And then so I dropped it. So I know that you said that you had 32 years of experience working as a physical therapist, and then I lost it.
So 32 years as a licensed physical therapist. And, I got into physical therapy because I wanted to serve people. Growing up, I was a high school athlete that would never get beyond high school athletics. And I always liked science and the body and working with people. And so it was a natural fit for me. Many years was a clinical physical therapist. And then I started to fall in love with the business side of healthcare and went back and got a master's in healthcare administration about 13 years ago and started to climb the corporate ladder, if you will. I did that because I felt like one-on-one as a PT, I can help somebody. But if I help build systems and processes that were really well honed and focused on patient-centered care, I help lots of people at once. I feel like I accomplished that on a lot of levels. But I also got exposed to a lot of situations, particularly dealing with the adult children of seniors. Everybody was so unprepared for these crises that would happen, whether it was a stroke or someone fall and break a hip, or they be diagnosed with some great illness. They just didn't know where to turn, and so often didn't have their legal and financial instrumentation in place. And I think, Jami, I shared it with you when we talked, and that is that I've literally been in a hospital room or a skilled nursing room where brother and sister were fighting over the bed of their mom as to what mom would want. And I think that was always really tragic too. And the way to avoid that is to plan, to have these instruments that exist, advanced directives, durable power of attorney for healthcare, living trust, living wills. There's a bunch of different instruments out there. But I always found it really heartbreaking to be in those situations because it literally tears families apart.
Oh, I know. I was going to share with you that I had one of my best friends from middle school. Her father had a stroke, and she and her sister in their 20s had to make life decisions that had not been made, including pulling the plug. And I don't think that children should have to make those decisions. But in our society, we feel like if we bury our heads in the sand or if we don't see it, it isn't there. And we are, doing a disservice to ourselves, to our family. But I also wanted to have you because people with HD, we have this now and not now orientation, so we're even less likely to plan. So that
Yeah,
was
you
what
took the
I
words
did bring
out of
you
my
in.
mouth. Yeah, I was going to say that too. I mean, probably, I talk to so many people and I get referred to a lot of people. And it's very common for people to say, that sounds great, but I don't really need that in me. And I think a lot of times, there is inertia, just natural inertia. People think, I'm young, I'm healthy, I don't need that. Personally, I can tell you that my wife and I did our living trust when we were 35, and I did that because of what I saw. But I agree with you. I think, if you're not staying in the conversation long enough to really understand what the outcomes could potentially be and how destructive it is emotionally, a diagnosis, an injury, a major medical decision can be really traumatic on its own. But then if you add in all the acrimony of disagreement and not really knowing what that person would want if they could speak for themselves, it's tragic and heartbreaking. And I think there is a component of it's not affecting me now. I don't need to deal with it. And I think someone with ADHD probably, kind of exacerbates that. It's almost like a force multiplier for inaction in that regard. And it's hard.
Absolutely.
It's hard.
Combined with a society that, talks about anti-aging, like, okay, let's not go there and let's do everything we can to
Right.
avoid it. When, I am a cancer survivor, diagnosed at 34. And, when you've gone through that at a young age, you're like, well, I hope I do get to be older, one day. So,
Given what's going on with the government shutdown, there's a lot of rhetoric around people under 50 don't need healthcare services. And that's just not true. And I think that does all of us a disservice. The way I look at it is every person that you would talk to that really has a good sort of idea for planning would say, well, of course I plan for retirement. If I contribute to a 401k or an IRA, or I have some sort of mechanism, an annuity or some type of financial plan. Everybody gets it on the financial piece because the vision of trying to live without money in your 70s, 80s, and 90s is pretty bleak. People don't.
you when you say everybody, because I think that's actually another challenge of people with ADHD. A lot of times their budgeting is now and not now. And so a lot of times I see it in my line of work as a senior move manager where people do not have the money that they need to live the way that they want to live because they didn't adequately prepare. So I hate to use the term everybody, especially with this audience, but never everybody.
I accept that edit. You're right.
I,
Most people would understand that there's a need to plan for retirement financially, but the need on the health care planning, long-term planning, they don't have that same sense of urgency because it's often not tangible. It's not something you can see and touch and feel. It's not a statement that you get every month from your retirement account. Right? So, it's not that piece of paper that everybody can feel. And so out of sight, out of mind. And again, being around ADHD the way I have, and I'm pretty sure I'm one of the group, you know,
I mean, you're a
uh,
member of the tribe.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I am pretty sure.
And
But
I do want to, because with our
mm,
audience, we're super creative and fun and funny. And this is just, we're going to go back, but I think we need to pause.
it's
We need to pause and we need to course correct to get some excitement going. Also, because you're going to want some really good reels that we can put on social media.
sure.
And then we'll go back and we'll give advice. So we're going to pause. And then I'm going to do a little bit of the commercial now. It's the second one that I've recorded with the book in my hand.
Right.
This explains so much understanding undiagnosed ADHD because I am not a doctor and I cannot diagnose it. But if you order your copy on Amazon or you happen to see me somewhere, then you can join us on our virtual book club with my mom, Vicki, who is the original grandma, on November 23rd. So anyway, you can go ahead and go to Amazon or you can find out more information on my new website, which is how you can get in touch with me for coaching at Jami, Jami Shapiro, Shapi, as in P as in Paul, IRO.me for me. And because believe it or not, Brett, I could not get JamiShapiro.com. So, okay, so we're going to pause and we're going to listen to what I've got to say in my commercial. And then we're going to come back and Brett and I are going to have a little more fun in our conversation. Hey there, Grandma Has ADHD listeners. I'm your host, Jami Shapiro, and do I have some exciting news? My book, This Explains So Much Understanding Undiagnosed ADHD, is now available on Amazon. My mom, Vicki, and I wrote this together. She's the original grandma who inspired this whole journey. I'm calling this the perfect is the enemy of done version, because if I waited until it was perfect, you'd never be holding it in your hands. This book is for us, those of us who've spent our whole lives feeling like we were too much or never quite enough. Inside, you'll find why you've always felt different, ADHD traits you didn't even know were ADHD traits, how to declutter without the shame spiral, and so much more about thriving with ADHD after 50. Here is the exciting part. Everyone who purchases the book gets free access to a virtual book club that my mom and I are hosting. We're going to share stories, laugh about our ADHD moments, and create that safe space where you can finally take off that girdle. When you read the book, you'll know what I mean, and just be yourself. Here's what to do. Head to Amazon, search This Explains So Much, Jami Shapiro, grab your copy, paperback or ebook, and visit grandmahasadhd.com to take the ADHD quiz and get your book club registration link. Understanding your ADHD isn't adding to your plate. It's finally understanding why your plate has always felt so full. I cannot wait to see you at the book club and hear your stories. And if the book resonates, please leave an Amazon review, as well as for this podcast, to help other women find their light bulb moments. Thank you for being part of this community. This book exists because of all of you. Ever wondered why helping a loved one declutter feels like speaking different languages? I did, especially with my mom. It wasn't until I founded Silver Linings Transitions, helping San Diego seniors organize and move for over a decade, that I discovered why. We all experience clutter differently, and for those of us with ADHD, it's a whole other world. If you are listening in the San Diego area and feeling stuck with moving, paperwork, photos, or home organization, our team at Silver Linings Transitions gets it. We understand ADHD's unique challenges, and we won't just help you get organized. We'll create sustainable systems that finally stick. Schedule a consultation with our team today at 760-522-1624. That's 760-522-1624, or find us at silverliningstransitions.com. We are back with Brett Frankenberg, and I want to say this. I don't think we should be avoiding these conversations. And so we are going to go back to it, because that's part of the reason that I wanted to have you here, is that we are avoiding those conversations. But I also know that a lot of our listeners or viewers are tuning in because they like to laugh and they like to hear themselves and other people's stories. So we're going to do a little of that for our listeners, and then we'll go back and give them kind of like the hamburger in reverse. Have you ever heard of the sandwich compliment or the sandwich? Have you ever heard of this expression before? So we have something critical to give someone, and this is really good for someone with ADHD. It's called a sandwich. And you start with something light and easy, like, hey, Brett, you were so funny when I heard you at the Serving Seniors Networking breakfast, and I thought you were really engaging. Then the meat. But you know what? You kind of smelled, and I think you need to do something about your body odor. I see Brett laughing. And then you finish with something great. And I think if you get deodorant, you can take care of that really significant smell, and then everybody will want to be around you again. So it's like delivering what you really need to say in the middle of two compliments.
I hope you were kidding.
Of course I was. But that was my brain. Just,
Oh, you got it. No worries. It's great. I shared with you that my youngest son has ADHD, and he was a handful right from the get-go. And my wife had recognized it. And I think I had shared with you a sheet when she was seeking treatment, which ultimately was in the form of pharmaceuticals. She gave me a book to read. And I read the book. I saw a lot of myself in the book. And they talk about the genetic component in the book. And my dad was diagnosed well after I had read that book. So talk about a meat of the sandwich. That was definitely me. But I think the thing, and I think this was really very profound for me. And so it's something I wanted to share with you and the audience, which is I didn't really get my wife's perspective. And I don't know if that's because I too have ADHD, or maybe I just didn't want to see it. But in that book, there was a hand drawing of a little boy in a rowboat. He had a fishing pole and he had a fish on the end of the line. And his expression, of course, was this big, grin, and he was all excited. And it said, this is what the person with ADHD sees. And then you flip the page and it was the same drawing, except it was pulled back and the boat was about to go over a waterfall, and that this is what everybody else sees. And even though my son at the time was 4, he's now 18. My wife turned to me and said, at some point, he's going to get behind the wheel of the car, and is he going to see the stop sign? And that was one of the most profound moments for me where I said, okay, I understand. I understand. And I think the funny part about it is after I read the book, I sat down with my wife and I said, I think I have it too. And she looked at me and she said, I thought the same thing about me.
Oh, so
But I
she
don't
can.
think she does. I don't think
Okay.
she does. Yeah, I don't.
Okay. Well, I have two parents with it, and it looks incredibly different on both of them. My father was the stereotypical, kind of like your son, hyperactive. I have a half brother, by the way, who was diagnosed in the 80s and had to be put on Ritalin. And so when my ex husband came to me and said, "You have ADHD," I was like, "No, I don't, because that's my hyperactive brother. I can sit still and I had good grades and, all of the things that we think that it's the opposite." And it wasn't until I realized that my mom, who could sit and read books for hours and was very like just sedentary, because I am combined type. So I'm hyperactive like my dad and I'm inattentive like my mom, that I was like, wow, it looks so different. Like when I ultimately was diagnosed with my child, I'm like, oh, well, I got it from my dad because it was so clear, right? But again, I didn't start this whole ADHD world or the Grandma Has ADHD podcast until I recognized it in my mom, which was just very, very different than how it presented in my father and my brother. So that was a little sidestep. Okay, so
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about little Brett then, if you're now coming to, maybe that was me all along.
Yeah, it's funny. Growing up, I had a lot of vision problems, actually. So I had something called amblyopia, which was,
I know it.
yeah, it's a spasticity of the suspension ligaments in my iris. And I mentioned earlier, I was always athletic. And so from a very early age, I think I was about 2.5 or so. And my dad took me outside just to, toss a ball with me. And he tossed the ball at my chest, and I kind of went to get it all the way over here. And he did it again, and I did the same thing. And he kind of really quickly realized that, there was something wrong with my vision. And so from the time I was about 2.5 to about 4, my right eye was patched, and it actually forced my brain to pay attention to the input from my left optic nerve, and that preserved my vision, or really the brain's ability to see the input from the left eye. In fact, my ophthalmologist told me that for years I should thank my dad, otherwise I would have not been able to see out of my left eye. So that did have a profound impact on me as a very young child. I do think looking back, I was probably very hyperactive, and I was probably seeking ways to, in my mind anyway, to divert attention from the fact that I was wearing a patch over my eye when I was,
Mm.
and I also had big, thick glasses, and that
Right.
wasn't cool, right? And so, for that reason, I think it made me strive a little bit harder to be seen as something other than just that. And, to your point, I did have the ability to focus on the things that I really found interesting and compelling. The things I didn't, I really couldn't focus on those things. And I think I was, a good student. I wasn't a great student, mostly because I think I was smart enough to retain things and get by, and I was a good test taker. But I didn't have what I would call really good academic habits until, I probably got into college. And so I couldn't, for example, a perfect example, there's a guitar behind me here, and I can play it somewhat. I am not really meant to be a producer of music. I'm meant to be a consumer of one. But when I was little, my mom played piano, and I just couldn't focus on reading music and learning scales, and all of that just didn't excite me on any level. And I just couldn't bring myself to practice. And so, I gave up on it, and my parents gave up on it, because a lot of frustration for everybody. I think it's some wasted money.
A lot of
Yeah.
those hobbies that I picked up and then put down. And that's actually very, very common in the clients that I see now, is all of the unfinished projects and the craft supplies and the exercise equipment and the books and all of the things, to use an expression that everybody's using these days, the things, all the things.
Yeah. Well, and I was always relatively active and athletic. And ironically, the exercise equipment is the thing that I use with regularity. I know people always joke around about, their treadmill becomes a place to hang their clothes or whatever, but I have an elliptical that I use all the time. He built during COVID in the garage. We built a little gym out there. And I could be honest with you and tell you, I don't particularly love doing it, but I love the way I feel afterwards. And I think the older we get, I've also, given my background, I understand the need to stay active. I will say what I am inspired by is I have a lot of friends that are older that are still skiing aggressively, playing pickleball, playing golf, playing softball. And, I want to do that as long as I can. I mean, I'd like to do it for another 25 years if I can. And so, yeah, I also surf. I recognize there's going to be a time in my life I probably would be able to do that, but I'm hoping it's 25 years from now. But those things still, they will hold my attention and my interest because I think, especially the outdoor activities, more than anything else, are very spiritual. I get a lot of energy from being out in nature, and I never find myself bored in being outdoors in nature.
I totally agree with you. Today, even, I get up now. A lot of times I like to go to the gym in the morning so that I know that I've done it. But some days, like I was gone all last week at a conference, and my most productive time for work is in the morning. And so I'm like, I need to just get in front of my computer. So I took a midday hike and I went. That's why my hair is a little wet because I had to shower. But yeah, I realize when I'm stressed out, I need to get that, my adrenaline going. I need that exercise. And being outside, you're absolutely right. And I want to reiterate that for our listeners too, because that's something that I talk about it. Moving our bodies, and we don't have to call it exercise, mitigates ADHD symptoms and mental health challenges, and it helps with aging. So there's just absolutely every reason in the world to be moving your body.
And aren't you part of the group that does the networking hike at Torrey Pines?
Yes, I started I call it net walking.
Networking, that's right.
Net walking, because it's, two birds, one stone. I actually, if I'm just sharing with you, the event that you and I met at was that so Brett and I are both in the San Diego area. We're both serving the senior community in San Diego and their adult children. And I don't go to those events anymore because I realized that I'm really, really uncomfortable. And although I am extroverted, I am an introverted extrovert. And when I have to do small talk and turn it on, it's so draining. So I would rather have significant conversation and I'd rather do something with my time that feels right for me, that doesn't deplete my energy. And so I decided, like, two birds, one stone. This way I get to exercise. And if I get to meet people for business, that's a double bonus. So you won't see
And
me very.
I think it's great. I think, there's more. I've heard of other, maybe not as publicized or formal, but I know there's a bunch of people that paddle out at a certain break and they call it a board meeting, right? They're all on their surfboard.
I love
Yeah. And I think it's important. I think it's important to, quite frankly, when your heart rate is up and you're breathing a little farther and you're having conversations with people, I think you're a little bit more real. And I think you're a little bit more in touch with kind of who you are. And I think it's easier to connect with people because it's a shared experience. Anytime you have a shared experience, I think it's always really, really positive. I mean, I think back to, again, I'm going to go back to my son who's got ADHD. He's a freshman at San Jose State. When he did not pledge a paternity his first semester, but he's thinking about doing it in the second semester. And what I told him is that the people that you pledge with, right? That's a shared experience. That's something that, 20 years from now, no matter what you guys go through, you went through that together and you'll always have that. And I think that really does translate to the business world. And I think you make a really good point about mental health and exercise. And that's not just for ADHD, but for any.
absolutely,
Really.
absolutely. One, I'll say, just to piggyback on that too, that, that connection with people is essential to our mental health as well. And that's why so many people struggle during COVID, but especially people with ADHD, that acceptance among people who get you, it does help to I can't find the word, that's another thing that happens with ADHD. I'll describe the feeling, which is just to feel like I get to be myself with these people and
Sure.
I get to make sense of my life. And I don't have to be beating myself up or feeling shameful for the things that I didn't do or the things that I'm looking back on with regret. And then when you just find other people and you can laugh about it, like even this, at the beginning of our podcast, when I'm like, yeah, you didn't send me the bio and I
I
had to
didn't.
redo it. No. And I'm like, you didn't, but did you feel judged?
No,
But let me
judged at
ask you a
all.
question.
Yeah.
If there was somebody who like had their shit together, right? And they're very polished and then
Sure.
you didn't do it, would you be embarrassed?
Oh, so long as it doesn't put them in a bad situation. I mean, I try to live up to my obligations, right? And I try to do the things I say I'm going to do. So if that puts somebody in a bad situation, then I would feel bad about that. But coming from where I came from, I worked in corporate America for the last 16, 17 years of my career. And the amount of people that say they're going to do something and don't is kind of staggering. And quite frankly, that's one of the reasons I wanted to get away from that is, people can say all kinds of things, but it's not what you say matters. It's what you do. And so when you brought that up, the first thing I said was, well, I can send it to you afterwards. You said, no, I got it. I went to your website. So, I guess you can't turn back the clock, but you can offer to make it right. And I think
Yeah,
that's a
for sure. I always like that too. I don't think it's that you make mistakes. I think it's how you handle mistakes. So I do want to circle back to what do our listeners need to know? What words do you want to impart with them before we end this conversation today?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So I think for me, again, I left my previous life because I wanted to serve and help people. So people come to me typically in two different ones. One is they're coming to me in crisis, as we've talked about. And my goal there is really to guide and navigate that family and that patient through the healthcare system, which we know to be very complex. The goal in doing that is to make sure that they understand the situation and they understand the choices that they're faced with and that they're going to make, that their voice is being heard, that we translate all the jargon, and that when they go to make a decision, they can make that decision with confidence. And so what I try to do is I try to save families the time, the stress, and the money, quite frankly, in making those decisions, and then ultimately give them peace of mind in that decision making. The
I
second
love
group
that.
Thank you. Yeah, the second group of clients, if you will, or bucket, are the people that come to me for long-term planning. I'll give you a really quick example. I'm working with a adult child of two seniors now. The dad has pretty advanced Parkinson's, and mom is been the caregiver for 15 years and is really burnt out. They need planning and they need triggers to realize, hey, at this point, you really do need help. So what I do with them is I build in a long-term plan that certain triggers and we get their input so that when those triggers are tripped, you've already determined what's going to happen next. We can have emotion about it. We can grieve the loss of independence. We can feel bad about it. But ultimately, this is for their safety and their quality of life. And so it's really interesting that most people really don't think about things in that way. But people, especially people with chronic progressive disease, something like a Parkinson's or even a dementia, really, really important that they have a plan. And that takes a lot of stress off the family and it allows everybody to kind of focus on the quality of that person's life.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And that is so important. So are you only serving people in San Diego or California, or are you outside of that?
Oh, great question. No, I'm actually nationwide because of technology like this. I've had patients in Pennsylvania, Chicago. In fact, the couple I just spoke about with the Parkinson's is in Massachusetts, and I'm able to do things virtually. I am truly concierge and white glove. In other words, if they want me bedside in Massachusetts, I'll be there. I don't think it's necessary, and it's extremely expensive to do that with travel and all of that. And so I really encourage them to not spend the money on that. We have a lot of different tools, including an online portal that facilitates communication, facilitates plan building. It also houses all of their medical records in real time, which is tremendous. And it also connects all their physicians as well as all their other service providers, like an attorney or a fiduciary or an estate planner or even just a family friend that wants to be involved, right? We can
Well,
include all those people.
I,
And we also include all the advanced directives too. So that's really important.
well, I
So,
want to put a plug in for that plan that you include a senior move manager. So I am part of a national association called the National Association of Senior and Specialty Move Managers. And we have a strict code of ethics, insurance requirements, continuing education. We can be found all across the US and in other countries as well. And so I just want to encourage you to know that that is a service that can be provided and can be included. And of course, we're here locally, Silver Linings Transitions, but we, as part of NASM, are available in other cities. And I always want to put a plug in for our listeners too, if this is an industry that exists. But I also think for you to know when your clients are making those decisions, what do they do with the house? How do they divide their belongings? Do they need to downsize and declutter? All of that. So just, it was such a natural area to add
yeah,
that.
I think it's great. I mean, and you know this better than most, that people don't understand all of what goes into something like that until they're knee deep in it or neck deep in some cases, right? And it's overwhelming. And I think what ends up happening in my experience is that people unfortunately end up focusing on the wrong thing. That set of sterling silver utensils and all that isn't really that important at the end of the day. I mean, I know it might be important to somebody's emotional well-being, but really putting on an energy into squabbling over that is not where that energy needs to go, because there's a million other things that we need to do. I think, again, going back to ADHD, I mean, it's easy to fixate and focus on the material object, but really at the end of the day, the most important thing is making sure that that person is safe, making sure they have the best opportunity for a positive outcome and a positive quality of life. That to me is more important than any material possession that they're in.
Absolutely. And I also want to highlight, like, making a decision in your reptilian brain when things are fight, flight, or freeze and you're flooded with emotion is not the time to plan or make decisions. And so hopefully you have made them proactively, but if you haven't, that's an even better reason to bring in, that sense of reason, that person who's removed from that situation and can guide you when you're not in that heightened state of emotion. So
Absolutely right. No, you're right about the emotions. And that's something that I talk about with people all the time. I mean, one of the best rationales for bringing me in is I've been there a million times. I know the system. I know how the system works. And I know how to make the system work for you.
Good.
When you're the loved one or you're the patient, your judgment will be clouded by emotion. There's just no question about that. And it's
absolutely.
not.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so give us how people can find you. Just repeat your website or your phone number.
Sure. People are welcome to call me or text me at 619-316-6869. Our website is www.apexhealthadvocates.com. On the website, there is an opportunity to book 30 minutes it's a complimentary 30-minute discovery call. Tell me about your situation. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, and I'm going to see if I can help you. And at the end of that call, we make a mutual decision whether or not there's an opportunity for you to help, and then you figure it out from there. So thank you for that. Thank you, Jami. I appreciate the
I love
opportunity.
that. I love the work that you're doing. And thank you for approaching me and sharing your story. As we said, I'll use the line because I did give it to you, but crisis doesn't make an appointment. And although we don't want to look at anything that is negative, I think that we need to make these decisions proactively so that we really can make the rest of our lives the best of our lives. So anything else you want to add to that closing, Brett?
Just that it is about quality of life, but illness, injury, and death are a part of life. And so we need to recognize that and not hide from it, but actually manage it to the best of our ability. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it with you. And I've enjoyed the conversation. So thank
Yeah, me too. And look forward to, if I have to be at those networking things, I look forward to seeing you again.
you. Will.
All right. The opinions expressed on Grandma Has ADHD podcast are those of our guests and hosts and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content discussed in this episode is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The host, guests, and producers of Grandma Has ADHD do not assume any liability for the content of this podcast. Listen at your own discretion.